I think that the more you know and the more genres and styles you master, they all cross-pollinate and they all inform each other and they all help in so many different ways.
Hi, Jed. It's so lovely to talk to you.
Lovely to talk to you also through the miracle of Zoom.
I know, isn't it amazing? Where are you at the moment?
I'm in New York City in my home studio, and you can see shelves of books and CDs all over the place.
I see. Yeah.
It's all very well organized, and fortunately.
Are you a perfectionist?
That's an interesting question. In some ways, perhaps I am, because of aspiring to certain ideals, but I think that there's the fine line between perfectionism and rigidity.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't consider myself rigid. I hope I'm not. But perfectionism is something to aspire to. And however, one can be flexible and one can adjust. And so like when you're seeing organized libraries, that is not so much a matter of perfectionism. It's a matter of necessity and having things organized, because I am a radio host in addition to my composing and piano playing. And I have a weekly radio show called Between the Keys, which is all about piano music. And I still use physical CDs. And when I want to find music, I have to know where it is. And so, it really amounts to like a radio station library in a way. And of course, all of my scores are filed away. I have filing cabinets that are very discreet. You can't really see them because they're almost like the supports for desks. And I have one part of my studio, which is for my journalism and my radio work. And the other part of the studio is for my piano playing and my composing. So it's completely compartmentalized, but it seems to work. And there's a lot of stuff here, but it's not cluttered.
Yeah. Well, but Jed, let's Julie Andrews sang, let's start at the very beginning. And so let's start at the very beginning with you. What was it about the piano that fascinated you as a child when you started learning the piano?
I always played the piano at first by ear because we had an upright piano in our basement in the home where I grew up in West Orange, New Jersey. And I loved music from babyhood, and I was constantly exposed to music. My mother was constantly bringing records into the home, and I'm giving my age away by saying records, meaning not only vinyl, but 78s, believe it or not, the old shellac. And my mother would bring in records of all speeds and in all styles. She wasn't discriminating. So I was hearing children's music, as well as hearing Beethoven, as well as hearing jazz, as well as hearing Elvis Presley, and she was also a poet. So I was hearing spoken word recordings. She would play recordings of poets. So hearing T.S. Eliot reading alongside hearing Wagner's Götterdämmerung, that was just kind of, the normal playlist, I imagine. But I was messing around with the piano and trying to figure out how to play. So I was teaching myself, but then I had lessons that I started at, I think, 4 years old, maybe, or 5. I don't quite remember. And I also studied violin and cello, but I was the world's worst violinist, and even a worse cellist.
Really?
And I played guitar, you know, like everybody growing up in the 60s. I was a rock and roll fanatic, and I loved the Beatles and Bob Dylan. And I was a Frank Zappa fan before anybody knew him.
Really? Wow.
Oh, yeah. I loved weird music. So I loved playing guitar, even though I could only play 3 chords. And I still only know those 3 chords on the guitar.
Really? And do you sing? Did you sing as well?
No, I'm a terrible singer. I am the world's worst. I'm even a worse singer than cellist. I can carry a tune because I used to have perfect pitch, but sometimes I do sing when I have done some pieces for piano where I'm speaking from the piano, and there have been moments where I've had to sing. But it's really more of a novelty thing. I'm certainly not serious. And that's kind of ironic because I used to do a lot of accompanying in my younger years. And I was quite a good accompanist. And then I joined Accompanists Anonymous. So, but I've been surrounded by vocal music, and I've written a lot of vocal music. And in fact, I'm revising an opera right now. So so when I'm composing for voice, I'm singing. So, and I love great singing. And that is really what, you know, one of my favorite forms of music is really opera and singing, but I just can't sing myself.
Okay. But now all these different genres that you were interested in as a young child, do you think that also has an influence on how you write music now, how you compose?
Oh, absolutely, because I'm open to anything. And also, it's not so much a question of style, meaning that I'm not going to throw a bit of rock and roll into a very abstract classical piece just because I can. But I think that certain things that have to do with form and presentation cross over into the different genres. I think a good example of that is maybe, I don't know if I'm explaining this so well, but let's say if I'm writing a piece for string quartet or something, and rather than using large scale forms like a sonata form or theme and variations, I may make the quartet in the form of short songs, like pop songs. So that comes from the, you know, where you have the 2-minute song, and then you have, you know, A, B, A, C, or however you want to form it, or having little medleys of songs, you know, which come from cabaret tradition or something. I don't know. So in that sense, using that to kind of cross over. But I think there always has been crossing over. If you think of the suites of Bach, you know, they're dance suites, you know, so, you know, that's one example.
Yeah. Well, I spoke to Dominic Ferris, a pianist, and he said that, well, he's actually saying that he thinks that it's wonderful that if pianists or artists or musicians can play different genres, because that is also good for you as a musician to do that, you know, to understand the different genres. Would that also be
absolutely
something that you agree with?
Oh, I couldn't agree with that more. I think that the more you know and the more genres and styles you master, they all cross-pollinate and they all inform each other and they all help in so many different ways. And I think that if you can play jazz really well and to really master jazz rhythm, that will really help you with Chopin mazurkas or playing, you know, Mozart movements. Now, of course, the sense of rubato and phrasing and touch are very different in different styles. So you have to you have to be mindful of that. But like actually, even in addressing your first question, I was saying, how the pop styles can influence the classical composing, but it can also be the opposite, because I used to play jazz piano when I was younger, and I've started getting back into improvising. And I think in many ways, my years composing and writing contemplative music and through composed music has really strengthened my improvising, because when I'm improvising, I'm really doing it more as an arranger or as a composer and thinking in terms of longer term structures. And when you think of improvisers like Keith Jarrett, I mean, he is a great example of someone who could really control long forms in an improvisatory context. And in fact, many of his best improvisations, I think if you just listened to it and you didn't know what it was, you would think, oh, this is a great composition. Who's that by? And some of the best improvisers who are not, stuck with improvising on 32 bar songs, where they're doing things more freely, sometimes you think, oh, this is a great composition. But also you think about the great organ tradition of all the great classical organists. They were trained as improvisers, and they were trained to improvise strict fugues and symphonies and all that. So, this cross-fertilization, I think, is very important. Now I'm totally sidetracking, and I forgot the second question.
No, that's fine. But as a composer now, and as somebody who has this love for all the different genres, do you find that it gives you more freedom as well?
Oh, absolutely, because it depends on freedom. Well, yeah, it depends on what. Are you talking about, like freedom in terms of performing or in terms of creating?
And creating, like you have so much to tap into, that it gives you a bit more freedom to do your own thing, or to be, put your personal stamp on something.
Well, I don't know. Putting my own stamp on something it's not up to me to say that I'm doing it. I think that other people would have to say that I'm putting a stamp or that I'm not, because I would like to think that I'm original, but I don't know if I'm necessarily original. And is it something that is really all that desirable? I mean, I just try to, if I'm writing a piece of music, I just try to do the best I can with the material I can and what the situation is. And sometimes when I'm trying too hard to be clever or quote unquote original, that's when I get into problems. That's when it winds up sounding very unoriginal. I can actually give you a good example of this. I've been writing an opera, and I had a first draft of it, which was, we had a reading a couple of years ago, and there were sections of it that sounded like very generic, kind of not tonal, not quite atonal contemporary music that could have been written by any university composer. And it was very competent and very fluid, but it was really tedious and very uninteresting. And then I've been revising, and I'm writing music that is super, super tonal and very melodic. And I'm just trusting my instincts. And I don't feel that it's very original. I feel like maybe I'm writing fake Verdi or something, but it feels so right for what the story is and what the characters are and for what the emotion is. And also because a lot of the text is kind of abstract and poetic. I find that the simpler the music, the more the words have room to breathe. And it's so much more fun this way, and I'm enjoying it so much more. And I'm not thinking about being original or clever. I'm just kind of going with the flow of what the characters are telling me or what the story is telling me. And I'm going with a first instinct. But I'm also drawing on my long experience as far as timing and proportion, which is always a problem with young composers, knowing when something is too long or too short. And that's something that over time you kind of get a sense of how to pace yourself, which also is something that you get from being a performer and a programmer, to running order, contrast, contrast.
Oh, yeah.
And this informs programming a recital, as well as composing a piece of music, as well as putting together the contents of one of my radio shows. So you see, all of these things are integrated.
Yeah. Now I understand what you mean. But now, Jed, when you write these operas and when you write your music, how much of what is going on in your life affects what you're writing?
That's an interesting question. I think that generally when I compose, I'm putting in office hours where I just put time aside, and it's like I'm going to the job and I'm doing the job. I'm doing the best I can. I don't really think about inspiration. It's not like I'm walking around the street and just waiting for an idea to pop up. I just go to the piano or I go to my desk and I just rely on my professionalism. And then it's really from the work where the inspiration follows. It's not the other way around. Probably what goes on in my life will affect my work subliminally, but I only realize that after the fact, where I may see a piece of music that I've been writing or a CD I've recorded, and I see what that project was about in hindsight. Then I connect it with what was going on with my life at the time. I can give you an example if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Well, in the mid 2000s, like around 2005, I got this really crazy idea that came out of just some very casual improvising, goofing off the piano, where I was taking themes from great classical music pieces. Like I was taking the Ode to Joy from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and I started improvising with it in the style of a bad new age pianist.
Yeah.
And I thought it was kind of funny, and I started goofing around with that. But then I started to really think about it very seriously, where, I just kind of fluff it off spontaneously at the piano, but then I would go back and I worked on it a little more and more. And then I started doing that with more pieces from the repertoire, taking Shostakovich, taking Stravinsky, taking Schumann, all of these people, and basically making new age versions of these classical themes. So the result was something that I called Meditate with the Masters. And it wound up being a CD. And I really worked very hard on these pieces, where I was really fashioning these very carefully constructed arrangements. And I remember I showed some of these to Philip Glass, and his first reaction was so interesting. He didn't say, "Oh, I like it," or "I don't like it." He said, "I bet you learned something about your compositional process." He was so astute, and he was so right, because I did, because in circumscribing my creativity and working so specifically on something where I was taking Beethoven's Ode to Joy and making it into new age, I started thinking about compositional choices. Like, am I going to have some measures of rest in between statements of the theme? Da 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 dum, dee dee dim, Do I want to repeat it again? Dee, dee, dim. Do I want to make it twice as long? Dee, 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 dim. Dee, dee, dim. You see, so I was using the compositional craft to make these choices about proportion and form and length. And this is, what Philip does, because his music is very modular, with the repetitions and in the order of sequences. It's like putting Legos together, in a way. And anyway, so I did this CD, and what was going on at the time was my first wife, sadly was diagnosed with cancer. And when she was, thank you. And during her hospice care, the CD had just come out, and she was listening to it a lot in her last days because this is what she wanted to hear. So I think possibly subliminally, I was creating the CD as kind of a gift or something of comfort, because she was already ill when I started the project. I didn't think about that at the time, but looking back, 10 years, and just a aside, 3 months after my first wife passed away, I met a lovely woman who I'm now married with, and so it had a very happy ending, but so I think that's one way of looking at something connected with my life that I did not realize.
Well, this is so interesting that you tell it this way, and that, because I think sometimes I speak to artists and they tell me something about Beethoven's life, for example, and what he wrote, and I was thinking of living composers. If we also have to know this, is it important for you that people would know this? That this is the reason why this CD or this project that you did?
No, I don't think it's necessary to know that at all, because I think the music has to stand for itself. If a piece of music, I think a piece of music, if it's good and excellent and complete in itself, I think that's its own justification. I think that, the backstory could be interesting, but I don't think anybody should care about it, because I don't think it's relevant. I don't think it's relevant at all, because I think people will either like the CD or not like it. Just like any other of my projects.
Yeah, I think it's, I understand what you mean. But I also think that
I can also tell you, I think that there are probably composers who wrote some of their happiest and most exuberant music in the most miserable times of their lives.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure, I mean, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but if you look at all the composer biographies, you look at their timeline, and then you look at what was being written. Now, on the other hand, let's say there was a period in Beethoven's life when he didn't write an awful lot relatively to other periods of his life, but that was probably the time when he was obsessed with his nephew or something. But that has nothing to do with the quality of the work. Maybe it has to do with the quantity of the work, because if one is if one is having personal issues or is not performing or something, then maybe you're not doing as much or not being as productive. But that's not, I don't think that has to do with the quality necessarily.
Mm-hmm. And now when you write an opera, for example, because I spoken to an author the other day, and he said that many of the characters in his books and in his novels are loosely based on people that he's met, or characteristics of people that he met. Is this the same when you write an opera, for example? Do you use?
Well, the opera I'm writing, the libretto is by the Italian poet Luigi Ballerini, and it's an opera that's called Tools, and it's about a sculptor, Lawrence Fane, who lived and who was a great friend of Luigi's. And Lawrence sculpted objects that were kind of useless tools, and he was obsessed with Mariano Toccola, who was a Renaissance engineer who also made a lot of things like this. And the opera is about Lawrence Fane going to Limbo to meet Toccola, who is his idol, and they have a total misunderstanding, and the meeting is a disaster. And then Lawrence Fane goes on reality television to try to explain everything, and then they bring Toccola back on television. And I mean, it's kind of a funny opera, but so this is definitely based on a real character.
Yeah. But now, Jed, tell me, we've gone through, well, we're in this pandemic, still not over. But during lockdown, I also spoke to a lot of young students and young musicians who just started their freelance career. And I was wondering, do you have any advice now for young musicians who start their careers? Is there something you can look back in your career and think this is the advice that you can give somebody?
Yeah. If you're a composer, study as much counterpoint as you can as soon as you can.
And
that's compositional advice. I think counterpoint is paramount, absolutely paramount. And you learn from all the old masters because that's where you learn all the tricks of the trade. And that will always be useful to you. The other bit of advice really is that you have to, I think it's best that, you create your own audience and your own ensembles, because nobody's going to come looking for you and begging you for your music. Nobody wants to do your music. Nobody cares about your music. So what you do is you start a not-for-profit organization to get your music out there, which is exactly what I did. You make your own recordings. This is what Philip Glass did with Chatham Square in the 60s. And he was, driving cabs, because nobody was commissioning him then. Of course, it's a whole different thing, but now, this is what all the great composers did. I mean, this is what Benjamin Britten did, starting in his festival. Everyone, you think of Schoenberg and Webern and Berg, the Society for Private Performances. You have to be enterprising as well as be creative. Otherwise, you're just going to sit in your proverbial garret and just churn out stuff, which is great because you create a legacy. I mean, I know some composers who did not pursue careers, but who basically just wrote and wrote and wrote and were totally uncompromising about it. And then, they'll be discovered, later. So, but then there are people, who get a lot of success very early on, which is, fortunate. Everyone is different and people develop very differently. I think what inspires me very much is somebody like Elliott Carter, who found his real voice only when he was in his 40s. I mean, he was always composing, and then he kept refining and developing his style. And by the time he hit his 80s and 90s, it became so internalized and he got in with a fluidity and ease and communicative power that really, really came wonderfully into focus. And for somebody to keep developing that way over such a long period of time, I mean, that gives me hope. So and at this time in my life, I hope my prime hasn't happened yet.
Well, I think we're so young as we think we are. I believe that. So
I don't know. I still feel like I'm 23 and I'm reinventing my career every day that I wake up. Yeah. The only thing that tells me I'm not is my white hair, and I mean, I basically feel the same way I did when I was 23. The only difference is that if I introduce myself to somebody and I say my name, they said, "Oh, I know who you are." So there's the little bit of cachet, and that seems to have come from nowhere. But that probably comes more from my life as a CD reviewer and also radio host, because people care more about music critics than composers.
Oh, really?
Oh, I think so. I think, well, I think people care more about me as a reviewer than as a creative person, because their composers are a dime a dozen, but there aren't all that many really good writers on music. I mean, I'm not a critic in a sense that, like a New York Times critic, I write about everything. I'm not a pundit. I don't review concerts and I don't write opinion pieces because, for the simple reason that I don't want to be on the wrong side of history, like a lot of critics are, But reviewing CDs is a very different kind of thing, because it's a very specific Consumer Reports oriented kind of thing. It's a very limited thing, but I've been doing it for, I don't know how many, I can't remember, maybe almost 30 years, I guess.
Really?
Yeah. And because there aren't that many really good CD reviewers, the whole, classical music coverage is so disenfranchised that, people are so desperate to get reviewed. So, and I won't review my friends, of course. And the problem is that I'll review something and then a pianist will write to me saying, because they find me on social media and say, "Oh, thank you for the review." Or they'll say, "You are such an idiot, and how can you be reviewing me? You're totally wrong." But the ones who are thankful, they say, "Thank you for the review." I say, "Don't thank me. Thank Gramophone. They assigned it to me." But then I become friends with the pianist, and then I can't review them anymore.
Oh, I see.
And from that, and it's because of that, so I think in a way it's helped, because then the pianists realize that, I'm in their line of business. I play the piano and I write music, and then they'll commission me. But I really do everything I can to avoid conflict of interest, because, on the other hand, I've been reviewed very positively and very negatively. And actually, there is an occasion where a friend of mine who's a pianist, who I actually had reviewed a CD of his very positively for Gramophone. And this is before I met him. And then we met and we became friendly. And then he came to a concert of mine and he reviewed it. And he kind of said, "This is like revenge." And he actually gave it a good review, but he also made some criticism saying that, Jed had trouble with some octave passages. He was absolutely right. And I totally accepted it. I wasn't offended because he spoke the truth. He didn't say Jed is lousy. He just said that there were some technical troubles. And this is an observation. It wasn't an opinion.
Yeah.
And I think that with record reviewing, making clear observations is important. Now, you may frame them with adjectives, And so, and I think this also comes into the composing process, where being able to stand back and look at something. I mean, that's why I'm revising, this opera, and thinking, why does this not work?
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think one thing that I've learned in my years composing is knowing when to throw out something that's good that isn't working. You can't, even if it's good, it may be like I'm writing a set of variations and I have a variation that is not adding to the piece, and it's very good, but it needs to be edited out because it's not helping, it's not adding, it's extra. Just take it out, maybe use it for something else, but knowing, it's that editorial thing. Mm-hmm. And this also applies to putting radio shows together. If my playlist is too long, what piece do I drop?
Oh yeah.
What is not really helping out, or what is slowing things down? It doesn't mean it's a bad piece. It means in this context, it's not helping, but it can be on another show.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
So it's these aesthetic choices I'm talking about. So in a way, I guess I'm saying how all my work kind of interweaves, even though I like to compartmentalize all of it.
Mm. Well, that's wonderful if you can do it like that.
Yeah. I think one thing that we're maybe, you were talking about work during the lockdowns and how people were responding to it. And it's very interesting how I know people have responded to it in so many ways. Like I know like one pianist who was just so depressed that he just quit playing. Mm-hmm. But then I know other people who were very, very enterprising and who started wonderful projects. Like there's a fantastic pianist in Italy, Sandro Ivo Bartoli. And what he did was he decided that he would learn and prepare all of the Scarlatti sonatas and upload them to YouTube. And he did about one sonata a week, more or less. And he did this over a 2-year period. And that probably would have happened had there not been a lockdown.
Yeah.
And I think, people started video series. My friend David Hurwitz, who's the classicstoday.com, started a YouTube video channel where he does video reviews and talks about recordings. I don't think that would have happened had there not been a lockdown. But I think there are also personal things. I think for me, in the lockdown, my life really didn't change because obviously the concerts I had were postponed, but I had more commissions than I had in the previous 10 years, which I have no idea where that came from, but, I'm not about to turn anything down. But as far as like my radio work was very busy because I produce my radio show from home. I always have, and I've always worked from home, so that didn't really change. But I think that there were things just as far as being a good citizen and looking out for one another and, wearing the mask and social distancing and just being mindful in these ways, to be in the community. I thought that, well, maybe being a good citizen now is better than being a good artist, because if you're a good citizen, then the art will take care of itself, perhaps. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But what happened with me, though, was I used to do a lot of bodybuilding, and of course my gym closed, so I couldn't do that. But my wife has been doing yoga for many, many years. So she started teaching me yoga at home. And of course, I resisted it. Yeah. But then I started doing this, and then I started taking yoga classes online. Mm-hmm. And I really loved it. And I've been doing this for 2 years, where I have at least 2 lessons a week. And then I did a major nutrition regimen change where I lost 30 pounds, like or 32 kilos, and I've kept it off, for
That's
about
amazing.
a year. Oh yeah. Yeah, because I was much heavier 2 years ago than I am now, and that probably would not have happened had there not been a lockdown.
Well, I can tell you, I hear so many positive stories about what people did in lockdown, and even if it was just eating healthy or cooking, learning to cook or things like that.
Well,
I think it's so
my
important.
sister-in-law learned to cook, and she never did before. But I think and I think that I think what's been interesting are the hybrid concerts and online things, because it's created a new form. For instance, I know a few pianists who, like I was talking about that Scarlatti project, but I have another pianist friend who started playing concerts from her home, and she was talking in between pieces, and then there'd be a Facebook feed, so she'd say hi to people. And in a way, it was interesting because it kind of was bringing a 19th century salon aesthetic to 21st century technology. Like you could imagine, being in a private home with Chopin trying out a new piece, and then he'd go into the crowd and have a drink and talk, and then come back and play something else. And so you have this informality, but I think that this kind of online live hybrid thing, it's been very interesting, and how it will play itself out in terms of technology, in terms of how it's paid for, is still being worked out. And I think that the parallel is the invention of recordings in the early 20th century, how to many people it was just a toy or a novelty, but to other people this is a great way to communicate music and preserve music. So in a way, this kind of hybrid online live, Zoom concerts or Facebook, all these different platforms, it's in a way, it's like yet another new form, the way that film was new and recordings were new. Like film was not the same as theater because you had to act in very different ways. Just as with recordings, recordings are very different than concerts. And these new hybrid things, the hybrid concerts online are yet a very different thing. Do you play differently for Zoom, how you'd play for an audio only recording or for a live audience? So we're in a very interesting time.
Yeah.
And what I think is interesting is I wrote an article a couple of years ago for Gramophone where they wanted me to, the whole premise was that young pianists are going back to the golden age in terms of how they're playing, where they're being freer with the score and embracing more romanticism. I think that's true to an extent, but what I think is making the young pianist stand out is that because of technology and having to promote themselves and brand themselves and to make themselves stand out in a market that is so glutted with product, is that they have to become really enterprising, so that they're using technology to establish an identity as much as from the actual piano playing. And I think that they all kind of interweave.
Yeah.
And so that is actually just as much a part of their individuality as like Glenn Gould using recording technology to create a persona in that way.
Yeah. Well, I do believe, and I've spoken to, during the time that I did my project, Moments in Lockdown, I spoke to a lot of young students, also photographing them in their windows. And always have this idea that it will be the young musicians who will start a new movement, and they will be the ones that use online to their advantage, and they will, all these technologies, because I think they would have to do something different than.
Of course, because even in terms of putting programs together, they're not thinking of a CD release; they're thinking of a playlist, or a video series or something. The point is that these new forms and different ways of presenting music, these different structures. I mean, there are more pianists I know who are recording like almost DJ influence programs where they're playing different movements from different pieces and then mixing and mashing them up in different ways. Mm-hmm. And the way they interpret the pieces will, and these new forms are also influencing how they interpret the pieces. Like a fast movement, they may want to play slowly because of what came before and what came after. And it may not be the composer's original intention, but it's really like, you're being a curator, you're being a DJ, you're being a radio host, you're being a composer. So it's all of this interaction, I think. Yeah. And I think it's very, very healthy because it's not going to erase the traditional concert paradigm when somebody shows up and just plays 3 Schubert sonatas in one evening. Yeah. That's always going to exist. But having these different levels, these different possibilities, I think are interesting. Like sometimes on my radio show, I'll mix and match and slice and dice things to create a crazy kind of program. But then sometimes I may do a radio program where I'll just have 2 large pieces of music straight. Or then it'll be like a documentary type of thing. So I think that there's a lot of freedom. And also the thing I want to mention is I see, there are more and more classical musicians who are going into composing as well as improvising. And I think that is so healthy.
Really?
Like the composer performer genre, that whole, it has really come back big time, and it's wonderful. It's so healthy. If you think of like so many of the young pianists now compose, it's great, or transcribe. That wasn't the case 50 years ago. It's so healthy. And, when I was in college, I wanted to play jazz as well as classical music and compose. And I had to kind of fight for all of that because I wasn't really taken very seriously. But now it's the norm. And thank goodness, boy, I wish I was born 20 years ago instead of 65 years ago.
Really? Well.
Oh, yeah. Because I think so.
Well, there's still a lot of time that you can do all the wonderful things you are doing. But now I want to ask you, what is your wish for the future?
My wish for the future. Oh, well, if I tell you my deepest wish at the very moment, I would get into a lot of trouble, and we would get into a lot of trouble, and I can't make that public. But, obviously, I think just peace and kindness and health and equality and freedom. I mean, that's all I think is important. I think we all feel that way.
Yeah. And your music and your composing,
What about it?
what is your wish for yourself, or what you want to achieve still?
There are projects that I have that I would like to bring to fruition. Besides the opera, I'm composing a series of 1,827 bagatelles for the Beethoven 200th death anniversary in 2027. And each bagatelle is for a different pianist. And that's going to be kind of like my testament. And just hope that I'll be able to finish that and that'll be done. And I have a piano project where for the next 10 years or so, I am going to be playing the Mahler symphonies, piano four hands, and each with a different young pianist.
Wow.
And I have 3 performances are scheduled already. I mean, there's a project I wanted to do before the lockdowns happened, but now it is happening. And that it's just more for performing and really getting to know the pieces, and not so much for recording. I mean, if they're recorded, it's fine. But I think just kind of continuing to make music and to just kind of keep my curiosity up, and just to really be as healthy and to have my family and friends, that's really the most important. I mean, my family and friends, and that my wife and I can really have the healthiest future. I mean, and she's a wonderful painter who just keeps evolving and evolving, and
Really?
And I've really gotten a lot, being exposed to her work. I suppose I've corrupted her also, and I just love that I'm mainly, all of my collaborations are with very young people, and which is great because they kick my butt.
Okay.
I mean, I can learn so much from them because I get so much from that energy. I don't know what they can learn from me, but
But that's wonderful. I think it's wonderful that they can learn from you, but you can also.
I don't know what they can learn. I'm learning more from them.
Really?
I mean,
Yeah. But
well,
Jed,
thank you.
Well, this is so lovely to talk to you, but I have one last question for you.
Sure.
I want to know.
Okay.
I ask everybody, because now in this time, of course, all the businesses and restaurants, they also had a difficult time. Do you have a favorite coffee shop or restaurant in your area that you would like to tell where you go to when you wind down, or where you go for a lovely meal?
Well, I don't really go out to eat because my wife and I both cook.
Okay.
We cook all the time. So I don't. But what I can tell you, though, is we have an apartment in Milan.
Yeah.
Actually, that's my wife's apartment. Mima has an apartment. This is in the building where she grew up in Milan. So she owns this. So when we go to Italy, this is our home base. And there is an extraordinary pizzeria around the corner from us that is called SPIB, SPIB. Yeah. It's on a Via Legnone in the Milano, in the Macchini section. And it's a pizza that is made with the very, very thin crust. It's almost like a crepe in a way. So when it's brought to the table, it looks humongous, but it actually isn't. You can eat the whole thing very easily. And the ingredients are really fresh. It's my favorite pizza in the universe. I can't imagine anything else. So that is, for me, Milano. Even before I get to the apartment with the suitcase and unpack, I got to stop at SPIB and have a meal.
Oh, really?
So New York, I can't really recommend anything in New York because I don't go out to restaurants in New York. And in my neighborhood, There really isn't anything. I don't go out. If I want coffee, I make great espresso at home.
Okay.
And unfortunately, my favorite restaurant in New York, which was this fantastic Japanese place, unfortunately, it closed during the lockdown.
Oh, that's
that would have been the one I recommended. And I suppose like all my favorite New York restaurants all closed, but I'm certainly open to trying things, but and also,
well, I'll put the link of this.
However, SPIB, it's
SPIB,
and I don't know if you can eat indoors, but they were doing takeout, and when I was in Italy this summer, we ate outdoors. It was perfectly fine. So
wonderful.
I reckon I would say this is the place, SPIB, Via Lignone.
I will put the link. I will put the link in the description.
Mi piace questo ristorante, buonissimo, veramente. Excuse me, I'm speaking bad Italian. I get carried away.
I can't speak Italian at all. But Jed, this was really so lovely to talk to you.
Well, honestly, thank you.
It's so lovely to meet you on Zoom. And if it wasn't for the pandemic, we would probably never have met. So I'm so grateful that.
I hope to get to Vienna soon.
Yes. Well, please let me know and we can grab a coffee.
Is Damel still open?
Yes. Yes.
I've only been in Vienna once in my life, in 1977.
Okay.
And I was just there for 2 days, and I remember going to Damel. Yeah. And I went to the Stadsoper to hear Tristan und Isolde with Birgit Nielsen singing, and I had standing seats. I bought standing, and then of course I found a seat. So
wonderful. No, but you have definitely, when you and your wife come, you have to let me know when we meet.
Excellent. We would love to.
In person. That would be lovely. Yeah.
It's a date.
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, Petra, thank you so much for speaking with me. And thank you for your beautiful questions. I enjoyed our time together very much.
I think it's wonderful that all your opinions and the insights you have, it's just great. And I think it's so inspirational, your work that you're doing. And Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this.
Okay, take care. And you can tune in to Between the Keys every Tuesday night at 10 with a rebroadcast Wednesday at noon. And it is on www.fm.org. That's .org.
I will put the link also in the description.
Yeah, because all the shows are archived and you can hear webcasts for shows. And I send out newsletters, so you get all my playlists and everything.
That's wonderful. Okay. So I will subscribe to your newsletter.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Jed,
take care.
Have a lovely afternoon. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.